one by one. Let's start to begin right now. Um, this past week was Israel Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzma'ut. Israel marked her 76th anniversary. Notwithstanding all the stuff going on in the world, in Israel, life is as normal. And for those of us not there, uh, I remember my sister Rhonda living in New York, and for many years, she would not visit us in California. I've got a sister, Debbie, in the San Fernando Valley, and we were living already in California and trying to get Rhonda out to come out here because in those days I would travel to New York. And Rhonda explained she's afraid of earthquakes. And you have to live in Los Angeles to appreciate how ridiculous that is. Yeah, there's an earthquake every so often. It's 3.4. For us, it's a game. I look at my wife, and before we listen to the news, we start to gauge what number you think it's going to be. On the Richter scale, 4.6. I'll bet you it's 5.2. Tell you what, let's make a bet. If it's 5.2, I take you out to dinner. If it's 4.6, you pick the place. It's a game. But if you don't live in Los Angeles, certain people are terrified of her. What about the big one? So they're sitting on the New York City subway worrying about Los Angeles having the big one while some guy with a knife is walking on that car. So we have people in our class in Israel, and it's not what it would be in peacetime. There are like 100,000 Jews homeless for the last 4 to 6 months in northern Israel because of Hezbollah sending rockets. And in America, we don't know about that. And of course, in the South. But on the other hand, life in Israel goes on. That the 76th birthday was a little bit more muted because of the circumstances, but life goes on. Restaurants are open, entertainment exists, people are living normal lives. And it's going to be only better. Certain things have to work out, and this war has had a lot of things that had to be done. And sooner or later, it had to be done. It kept kicking the can down the road after every Hamas war, mowing the lawn, setting them back a few months or a year or two, with the inevitability that it's going to happen all over again. So this time, they've taken the steps that have to be taken. I'm not somebody who sits and worries. I'm a very positive-oriented guy. And when they talk a lot about the Biden administration holding up weapons, I'm not worried about that. Israel has enough weapons, and they'll get the Biden weapons too. At the very, very worst, it'll wait till November, the election in November. The day after the election, those weapons go. If either Biden gets elected, and he's happy with the Arab vote in Michigan, or Trump gets elected, and they'll get so many weapons they won't even know where to store them. In the same way, I see a silver lining even in the campus riots. And I talked about it in one of our other classes earlier in the week. I went to Columbia University in 1970, mid-70s, 71 to 76. And the assimilation was already starting to get out of control. When I began as a freshman at Columbia, there were 12 boys from the different yeshiva high schools in the greater New York, New Jersey area, 12 boys, freshmen, who wore yarmulkes. I was one of them. There were 12 of us. As I was finishing my senior year, I made mental note that only one other guy and I still were wearing kippot. Everyone else had assimilated. 10 of the 12 guys, they're still proud to be Jewish. They had Jewish girlfriends, came out of yeshiva, but they'd given up their yarmulkes. They'd become part of the Columbia University milieu. But the women from Barnard, who were religious, stayed religious. And that was my perception going into the 80s and 90s, that it's a very great challenge for Jewish guys to remain Orthodox, and the girls are able to maintain it at Barnard. But what I started to learn by the 90s is that everybody was assimilating. Jewish kids from good Jewish homes and Torah homes with a year in Israel, gap year, coming to Columbia Barnard, were giving up their religion. We're giving up the totality of their religion, holding on to parts of it for Yom Kippur, for the Seder, but giving up that which stood apart. That's not happening anymore. That's a hidden silver lining in this insane stuff going on the campuses. It's as though God Almighty was sending a lesson to the kids on the university campuses who have achieved great things by getting admitted into such campuses to teach them you're Jewish. You think you're going to assimilate and you're going to become part of the great mush of the society? I'm not going to let the Jewish people disappear. If I have to, I will send a bunch of Hamans, a bunch of Hamans onto the campuses to remind you you're Jewish. And we won't let you give up what makes you different. You want to be different? You're telling everyone around you you're different? I won't let you get away with it. You're going to remain Jewish. Netzach Yisrael lo yishaper. Jewish people are not going to disappear. Not out of bad things like Hitler, and not because you're warmly accepted into secular society. And so that's a silver lining. That's not to say we want this going on. And as I predicted, it's already winding down because finals and term papers would do. So it's time. And it will regroup in July at the Democrat convention in Chicago. You can count on it. But that's the silver lining. Gemara says, Haman of the story of Purim, Megillat Esther, brought more people back to Judaism than Mordechai did. That's what it is. So let's get started. Everybody's here now, primarily. And as yet, we start with taking note of Yom Ha'atzma'ut, Israel's 76th birthday, and we go on, as we do every week, to the week that was in the Israel and Jewish world. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we get started. This was a wedding this past week.
Thursday, May 13th, 1948, a day which would alter the course of Jewish destiny. It's now crunch time. The British mandate for Palestine ends the following day at midnight. If the Jews decide to declare independence, the newborn state will immediately face a threat of annihilation. If not, perhaps this historic opportunity could be lost forever. Here, in his home in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Yishuv, had to make the most difficult decision of his life, a decision that would have major repercussions for generations to come. Some context. In all of human history, there has never been a love affair between a land and a people as deep and enduring as the one between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. Since time immemorial, Jews have yearned to return to their homeland, Eretz Yisrael, beginning with a call to Abraham of Lech Lecha. Throughout the centuries of exile, persecution, pogroms and massacres, Jews have never stopped praying 3 times a day, every day, to return to their beloved homeland. However, it was not until the end of the 19th century that practical steps were taken to advance this return on a national scale. Led by Theodor Herzl, the Zionist movement succeeded in galvanizing the Jewish people around the idea of returning to the land en masse for the first time in 2 millennia. But awakening the nation to the Zionist idea was only the beginning. The following years were replete with tremendous challenges in Palestine, from draining malaria-ridden swamplands to integrating diverse cultures and languages of immigrants, from combating Arab terror to garnering support from the international community. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 set the stage for Britain to be entrusted with securing the establishment of the Jewish national home in Palestine. In 1919, following the First World War, the League of Nations granted the British and French mandates over parts of the Middle East. However, it would take almost 3 decades of conflict, lobbying, local politics, rapid demographic changes, and international pressure for this plan to ripen. Following extensive lobbying by the Zionist institutions, on November 29, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly voted in favor of the partition plan, finally granting the Jewish people a state in the land of Israel for the first time in almost 2,000 years. The Arabs rejected the decision, immediately launching attacks on Jews across the land of Israel. Early the following morning, Egged bus number 2094 was traveling from Netanya to Jerusalem when, close to Hatikvah, a local Arab opened fire on the bus, killing 5 Jews, including Shoshana Farhi, a 22-year-old woman who was about to be married that following week. This was the first attack in what was to later be the first stage of Israel's battle for independence. During the following 5 months until the declaration of the state, almost 2,000 Jews were killed in acts of violence and terror. During those turbulent times, as the leader of the Zionist movement, Ben-Gurion had to grapple with several critical dilemmas. First and foremost, should an independent Jewish state be declared at this challenging time in Jewish history? Would such a declaration immediately plunge the nascent state into a fatal war? Would it perhaps be the most short-lived state in all of human history? Could the small army of so many Holocaust survivors triumph against the might of the Arab world? Behind the scenes, a real drama was unfolding. Moshe Sharet, Ben-Gurion's closest confidant, had just returned from Washington, where he had met with Secretary of State George Marshall. The news was bleak. The US government was pressing strongly for a 3-month ceasefire, threatening an embargo if the declaration would not be postponed. Despite this immense pressure, Ben-Gurion went ahead as planned, going so far as to push Sharet not to express his own support for the American proposition. On May 12th, Ben-Gurion summoned the members of the People's Administration for what turned out to be a marathon 13-hour discussion on whether to declare independence or accept the American deferral. The group was sharply divided on the matter. It was not clear whether the disorganized and not yet unified defense forces would be able to withstand the might of multiple Arab armies. Ben-Gurion, however, was adamant. In unequivocal terms, he demanded that the members accept his proposition and declare the state immediately. After his speech, a vote was held by the 10 members of the administration who were present. By a hair's breadth, the vote passed 6-4. Ze'ev Sharf, Secretary of the People's Administration, remarkably said, "It is doubtful whether a quorum of Jews has ever been called upon to decide so decisively on the course of Jewish history." The British mandate was due to expire at midnight on Friday night, May 15th. Ben-Gurion wanted to ensure that there was unity during this historic moment of the declaration, and therefore, in deference to the Shabbat, had the ceremony moved earlier to Friday afternoon at 4 p.m., a few hours before the onset of Shabbat. A unique and special friendship had developed over the years between Ben-Gurion and the leader of Mizrahi, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Fishman Maimon. Despite their great differences in religious outlook, the two had a mutual respect and bond. They even decided to give their daughters the same name, Geula. At this moment of historic significance, Ben-Gurion summoned Rabbi Maimon from the besieged Jerusalem, sending a tiny broken airplane to bring him to Tel Aviv for the declaration ceremony. He wanted him, his friend, at his side for this historic moment. Upon arrival here at Ben-Gurion's home, Rav Maimon joined the discussions about the final wording of the declaration, and specifically whether or not it should include the name of God, with some secularists insistent that it should not. Once again, Ben-Gurion found a path to unity, using the biblical term Tzur Yisrael, the Rock of Israel, as a term all could agree on. Under extraordinary pressure, both from within and without, from those, even in his own party, who were opposed to the immediate declaration, and from the threats of the American administration, a self-proclaimed secular Zionist, David Ben-Gurion, was overcome with Ruach Gevurah, a courageous spirit of biblical proportions. It was now, or perhaps never. Ben-Gurion's courage, determination, tenacity and grit ensured that against seemingly impossible odds, the state of Israel was declared. Before the ceremony, Rabbi Maimon told Ben-Gurion, "Without a Shechianu blessing, it won't be a historical declaration." So Ben-Gurion said to him, "Fishman, you want a state? You recite the Shechianu." And so, at the close of this historic ceremony, the leader of Mizrahi rose, shaking with emotion, his throat choked up with tears, and recited this heartfelt blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, שהחיינו והתגדלנו והגענו לזמן הזה.
No sooner had his tears dried up, bombs began falling on Tel Aviv. The combined forces of 5 Arab armies attacked, ushering in the second stage of the War of Independence, modern Israel's most bitter war. When the guns eventually stopped, 9 months later, Israel had lost 6,000 people, 1% of her population. The question beckons, how could the chief rabbis of Israel institute the halachic day of Hallel and Thanksgiving at the earliest stages of the war, on the 5th of Iyar? Many thousands would die thereafter, and the war was far from being won. We normally only celebrate once the danger has been averted, when destruction transforms into deliverance at the war's conclusion, such as on Purim, Pesach, and Chanukah. Why was it different this time around? Incredibly, leading rabbinic authorities explain that this remarkable Ruach Gvura and almost otherworldly spirit of courageousness of the Zionist leadership of Ben-Gurion, Rabbi Maimon and the others, was no less miraculous than the victory of our warriors on the battlefield. Arguably, even more so. Less than 3 years after the horrors of the Holocaust, the yellow star of a downtrodden and desperate spirit was somehow revived into the blue star of vitality and hope. The dry bones in the valley of death had once again come to life. By the grace of God and the indomitable spirit of Gevurah, courage, Jewish history took a giant leap forward, and Jewish destiny had been miraculously revitalized.
An unprecedented sight. Israeli police raid Al Jazeera's workspace in occupied East Jerusalem after Prime Minister Benjamin.
Okay, you picked up on that, occupied East Jerusalem. So right away, you know that the reporter is not friendly. Occupied East Jerusalem. Al Jazeera is like the Associated Press or United Press International of the Arab world. And they have a television station, a television network, and they're all over the world. And what can I say? They had an office. They were operating out of Israel as well. And a whole bunch of people of my way of thinking for years had been saying they've got to close down Al Jazeera, get them out of Israel. But there are those in Israel who are afraid it'll get the world angry. And I think one of the things that's happened with all those riots and anti-Semitism around the world is it's actually caused some to have more courage and more spunk, because what do you have to lose? They're already trying to kill us anyway. So they finally announced just recently that they're closing down Al Jazeera, and they closed it down. And long overdue. And here's the report of the closing down of Al Jazeera by Al Jazeera. Here's their report. Let's get that back going. Okay.
Netanyahu's cabinet voted to shut down the network's operations. The government order, which was unanimously agreed upon, includes confiscating its broadcast equipment, preventing the network's broadcasts, and blocking its websites.
The government has now unanimously ordered the closure of the incitement mouthpiece of Hamas in Israel, Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera's broadcast was taken off Israel's main cable provider in the hours after the order. The emergency measure will last for 45 days, with the possibility of an extension for an additional 45 days. In a statement, Al Jazeera Media Network condemned the measure, saying in part, Israel's ongoing suppression of the free press, seen as an effort to conceal its actions in the Gaza Strip, stands in contravention of international and humanitarian law. Israel's direct targeting and killing of journalists, arrests, intimidation, and threats will not deter Al Jazeera from its commitment to cover, whilst more than 140 Palestinian journalists have been killed since the beginning of the war on Gaza. The network vehemently rejects the allegations presented by Israeli authorities, suggesting professional media standards have been violated. Last month, the White House said Israel's plans to close the network were, quote, concerning.
A move like this is concerning. We believe in the freedom of the press. It is critical. It is critically important, and the United States supports the critically important work journalists around the world do. And that includes those who are reporting in the conflict in Gaza.
The widely criticized move was also condemned by the Foreign Press Association, which urged the Israeli government to reverse what it called a harmful step, adding that this was a dark day for the media and a dark day for democracy. Hamda Salhout, Al Jazeera.
By the way, do you think that Ma'ariv, Yediot Achronot, the Jerusalem Post, do you think that Ynet, do you think that Israeli media are allowed to operate in Gaza or in the Palestine Authority, talking about a dark day for the media and whether something is concerning? I must admit, they never have closed down Ma'ariv or Yediot in Gaza. And the reason they never closed them down is they never let them in to begin with. So it's always good to think about what the real truth is rather than the propaganda. So that was that. We continue.
Hagar Matar is executive director of Plus 972.
A tense protest overnight here in New York in front of the Brooklyn home of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's heading to Israel. Dozens of demonstrators, you can see them there, were arrested, including 2 state lawmakers, as they call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
Eyewitness News reporter Marcus Solis is live outside of Temple Emmanuel on the Upper East Side, where security is always tight, but especially tight ahead of Shabbat services this morning. Marcus.
Well, Michelle and Shantae, members of the NYPD's counterterrorism unit on patrol here, walking around the temple as ahead of Shabbat services that are going to be taking place here and in synagogues throughout the city, where there will be a police presence, the NYPD monitoring situation there and across the city following a day of protests. Yesterday was billed as a day, an international day of action by pro-Palestinian groups, and there were a number of protests. Last night, it was in front of Senator Chuck Schumer's house. The Senate Majority Leader is headed to Israel, and there were protesters outside demanding that he call for a ceasefire as he travels to Israel with lawmakers. There were a number of arrests, including 2 local lawmakers, 2 assembly members, Zorhan Mandami and Marlene Mayanis, were arrested. Now, earlier in the day, another protest taking place, this one a larger one, Times Square. Palestinian supporters had been marching through the city, ended up in Times Square for a rally where they denounced what they say is the ongoing slaughter of the Palestinian people, and saying that resistance to Israeli occupation is not terrorism.
What we are here today to say is that the intention of that genocidal violence is to break the spirit and to break the resistance of the Palestinian people, but it will not be broken.
I see a valley of death of people who want to murder and kill and only see blood, yeah? And I walk in peace because God is with me.
Tensions high as there was a counter-protest, pro-Israel groups gathering at Times Square as well. In Brooklyn, police did make a number of arrests, 57 people taken into custody last night.
You know what I like about that report?
This morning, police made dozens of arrests.
What I liked about that report in particular, when I grew up, Jews were ashamed to use the word Shabbat. They referred to Sabbath. Instead of using the word tefillin, they used the word phylacteries. They just, instead of speaking of wearing a yarmulke, they wear a skull cap. Here was a simple report on Channel 7 New York, and 2 non-Jews, the anchor and the reporter, mentioned Shabbat. So in every single thing, you could see bad news or you could see good news. Jewish religious impact is spread enough in the last 40 years that people just talk about tefillin, yarmulke, and Shabbat. When I go for a haircut, I take off my yarmulke. I'll say to the person cutting my hair, just a moment, I'm taking off my yarmulke. And the response I'll get sometimes is sure, and sometimes they'll say, I thought it's called a kippah. Nobody thinks it's a skull cap. The Pope wears a skull cap. Cardinals wear a red skull cap. We wear yarmulkes. They look the same, but ours is a yarmulke, which is the Yiddish word, or kippah, which is a Hebrew word. Kippah is like a dome or a head or a covering. The Iron Dome in Israel is known as the Kippah Barzel. And a yarmulke comes from Aramaic. In the Talmud, they use the term Yara Malka. Yara Malka, fear of the king. God is king of the universe. And we wear Yara Malka, representing that we fear the God, the king of the universe. And for sure, Yara Malka became yarmulke. But I enjoyed it, watching two non-Jewish reporters just giving a fair story, referring to Shabbat. And the assumption is that all the viewers in New York, they know Shabbat. They don't have to be told Sabbath anymore. We've come a distance. Here we go.
At both the new school and at NYU. And just within the last hour, another group of demonstrators began gathering at NYU. Eyewitness News reporter Jan.
So recently, protesters took over every major college here in New York City. And although there were mass arrests and riot police, there's still pockets of protest activity. And observers say this could be the new normal here for a long time.
We begin with the breaking news. A massive show of force to crack down on college campuses in New York City. The NYPD moving in huge machinery.
The NYPD says it received a letter from the university asking police to move in after pro-Palestinian demonstrators refused to leave on their own.
About 282 people were arrested.
We are going to stay here. We are okay with the possibility of mass arrest. We are okay with the possibility of suspension.
I spend my time, I spend my money to get here, to pay for the tuition and everything, and they just cancel my class for no reason.
Cops made their way through campus in riot gear last night as they attempted to disperse protesters.
Just a short time later, officers entered the new school, where pro-Palestinian protesters have been set up for the last 12 days. Here, 43 people were arrested. Both schools say they called in the NYPD because of growing safety concerns and disruption.
We're here to peacefully protest against the genocide. As protests continue to escalate across campuses, many leaders believe they've gone too far.
So recently, a historic war memorial was vandalized by peaceful protesters. And what nobody's talking about is that although at first these movements looked like an organic showing of support for Palestine, when historic statues and monuments start getting vandalized, it shows there are anti-American undertones to all this. In fact, things were so crazy, the NYPD was forced to clear protesters from occupied buildings with a military-style vehicle called the Bear. On top of that, the police say half the protesters arrested at two of the largest uprisings weren't even students at Columbia or City College, which means whatever's behind these demonstrations is much bigger than anyone is actually aware of. And it also means there's money behind these imported non-student protesters. Related activity in the years to come. After all, the goals of the protesters have not been met. Have we seen the last of campus protests in New York, or are they just an extension of the protests and activity that has already been taking over this city since last year? Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.
And new tonight, we're learning more about a UT lecturer's arrest at a pro-Palestine protest on campus last month. His attorney says Richard Heyman was fired. And in just the last hour, Texas DPS sent us body camera footage of a trooper's encounter with Heyman on April 29th. It shows Heyman began yelling at troopers during the protests, and DPS says after UT had issued a dispersal order for protesters to leave the area, Heyman tried to breach an established bike barrier and damaged a trooper's bike.
You got that? That's the That's the guy in the blue shirt. He's your professor. Imagine spending $60,000 a year for your child to be educated by a guy like that.
Get out of here! Hey! Back! Get back! Get out of my face!
Heyman is charged with interfering with public duties, which is a misdemeanor. His lawyer says the university fired him after he'd worked there for 18 years. Now, we did reach out to UT. A spokesperson told us they can't comment on personnel matters.
Here with the latest on the ground at Columbia University, our very own Sarah Carter. Sarah, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much, Sean. You know, anti-Israel, pro-Hamas protests continued here today at Columbia University, despite growing concerns among Jewish faculty and staff that they are no longer safe here on campus. Sean, we spent the day here with them, although initially many of the protesters refused to speak with me. Eventually, some of them broke, and they did talk, and this is what they had to say. Everybody in America wants to know why you're all here. What does that mean? What is that? What is disclose, divest? Wait. No? Hamas attacked Israel, but they didn't attack IDF. They attacked women and children.
That is what Israeli sources say, a lot of which
that's what's been documented.
Yeah.
What does from the river to the sea mean?
It means that Palestine should be autonomous.
What river?
Okay. The expression is not anything bad of this.
No, there's an actual river and an actual sea.
Yeah, I'm aware of this.
No, but what river, what sea?
The river that literally is beside Israel and the Palestinian territories.
It's the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. October 7th, Hamas attacked women and children. Does Israel have a right to defend itself?
I'm asking you a question too.
Does Israel have a right to defend itself?
No one has a right to kill 30,000 people.
No one has a right to dismember babies and put them in ovens and kill them.
That never happened.
What is your solution?
Bomb Israel!
Sean, there was continued calls for more security here at Columbia University and across the nation as anti-Semitism appears to be on the rise. They expect these protests to continue throughout the week, and some even suggest that these protests will continue next week. One thing is certain is that Jewish students and Jewish faculty are looking for help, and they're looking for answers, and they're expecting the Biden administration to make a statement. Sean?
So comedian Jerry Seinfeld becoming the latest graduation speaker forced to deal with anti-Israeli agitators. But the crowd ultimately rallied behind the legendary comic as he shared his one-of-a-kind perspective on life. Watch.
Again, a lot of you are thinking, I can't believe they invited this guy. Too late. I say, use your privilege. I grew up a Jewish boy from New York. That is a privilege if you want to be a comedian. Thanks.
Alana Paykar was in one of those seats graduating yesterday, and she joins us now. Alana, were you surprised to see this happen? You know, Jerry Seinfeld obviously is Jewish. He talked about the October 7th, attack, but he hasn't been out there talking about the war at all. So why did they target him?
You know, given Jerry's very outward Zionism and his openly Judaism, I can't say I am surprised given these protests. It's very obvious that they oppose his point of view, but these students definitely went in there. They completely violated Duke's rules. They made it very clear to students that they're not allowed to bring in any signs, any flags, and these students completely violated the rules of Duke University.
So, Alana, you said that you weren't going to allow them to win. So it looks like the crowd overall at Duke University supported Jerry.
Absolutely. What you're not seeing on the media is that after these students walk out, and by the way, it's only 40 students, they walked out. After they walked out, the entire stadium started booing them and eventually started chanting Jerry's name, clearly in support of him being our commencement speaker. So
I guess my question, because I've been at these rallies and these little Gazas all across the country, would you say it's a small minority of them on these college campuses? Or do you see this growing movement? Like, do you feel support at Duke University being a Jew? Or is it quite fearful for you?
You know, Lawrence, I'm actually very thankful to say that Duke University, unlike other universities, has been a much safer environment for Jewish students. I'm somebody who's very openly Jewish, very openly Zionist, and I'm able to proudly walk around campus. I wear my Jewish star necklace, and if there's anyone to be targeted, I feel like I would be one of the first students, and I can happily say that Duke has done everything in their power to ensure their safety for students. Unfortunately, we cannot say the same for universities across America.
Yeah. Real quickly before I let you go, what do you think Duke is doing differently than the rest of the universities? Because I think it can be a model.
You know, I think there are many factors that go into this. One of them being that Duke has their rules and they abide by it, and they stick to it for every group on campus. It doesn't adjust based off of certain political beliefs, personal beliefs, identities. Additionally, I genuinely believe Duke has done an amazing job in building a community on campus. And what I am seeing on other college universities is that these students don't have a place on their campus. They don't feel like they have meaning. They don't feel like they have a purpose. And Duke has genuinely created a community that students feel a sense of fulfillment and don't feel the need to turn to this violence.
Yeah, it's such a good point because you see it all across the country where
Ari Berman is the president of Yeshiva University, and he joins me now. Rabbi, you just extended the transfer application deadline at your school. You want Jewish students to transfer to your schools. Why?
Thank you so much, Stuart, for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you again. Just to be clear, actually, it's not that we want Jewish students to transfer, it's that we're being asked by Jewish students to transfer. Our transfer rate now is up 53% this year. We have students who've regularly chosen Yeshiva University over universities like Columbia. Now we're seeing it more than ever. We are packed. Our enrollment is full. We don't even yet have the ability to fit everyone who's qualified, who can come to Yeshiva University. We have the longest wait list we've ever had, but we will not leave behind any Jewish student who is threatened. So we cannot leave behind a Jewish student who's threatened. So if Jewish students are unsafe on their campuses, we are morally bound to create the portal to give them place.
Do you think that Columbia, which is, in my opinion, a hotbed of anti-Semitism at this moment, can it be reformed?
I think it needs to be reformed. We cannot fit all the Jewish students at Yeshiva University, and that won't be good for America, and it won't be good for our society. Campuses should not be free from Jews. They should be safe for Jews. And we need to make sure that campuses like Columbia are acting appropriately, taking the right actions to ensure not mitigation of free speech, but all mitigation of hate speech. Hate speech needs to be condemned and hate speech needs to be disciplined. And we cannot have any ethnicity feel intimidated by their fellow students.
If it was any other minority than Jews, I think the outcry would be enormous. Because it's Jews,
I can't even imagine.
Exactly.
Stuart, you're totally right.
It's just,
it's
unimaginable what would happen if black folks were being chased off campus, or gays, or anything else. Rabbi, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but it was always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
בקרוב תזרח השמש, נדע ימים יפים מאלה, הלב נלחם בדאגות. כולם יחזרו הביתה, נחכה להם למטה, הלוואי נדע בשורות טובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. עם ישראל חי, בעליות בירידות, גם בשעות הכי קשות. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו. תוציא נחלתנו, לא תיפול כעת רוחנו, מסביב ברזל של חרבות. ויונה תפרוס כנפיים, התקווה בת שנות 2000, עוד נצא לשיר ברחובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. עם ישראל חי, בעליות בירידות, גם בשעות הכי קשות. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו, כי לא אבדה האמונה. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו, כי לא אבדה האמונה. עם ישראל חי, כי עם ישראל חי.
This is out of England, where a Palestinian, or I hate to use the term Palestinian, there's no such thing, where a flag of the Arabs of Gaza and of Judea Samaria was put on a pole in England, and some non-Jewish British lads decided to take it down.
It is a great privilege for Lynn and I to stand here in our capital, the nation's capital, to commemorate the Shoah and raise our voices publicly against anti-Semitism, racism and discrimination in all its forms. To stand with our Jewish communities, the people of Israel, at a time when anti-Semitism, racism and On the 7th of October last year, we saw the world standing in condemnation for the brutal murder of 12 other innocent men, women and children, including babies, by the terrorist organisation Hamas. But within a week, in our city's capitals, Belfast and London, there were filled with thousands shouting for the wiping out of Jewish.
A Palestinian student here in Britain has had a student visa removed by the Home Office, and I say good.
I'm Dana Abu Qamar, a Palestinian law student at the University of Manchester, and the Home Office decided to cancel my student visa after I spoke up at a pro-Palestine protest. I came here to the UK to receive an education, and as a resident, I thought that I would receive equal rights here in the UK in terms of my human rights to freely express myself and stand in solidarity with those who are oppressed in Gaza and beyond.
Well, your freedom of speech doesn't extend to supporting prescribed Islamist groups here in Britain, does it? Here's what Dana Abu Qamar, a Palestinian law student and leader of the Friends of Palestine Society at the University of Manchester, had to say immediately after we'd seen the horror of blood-smeared children's bedrooms, women raped and murdered and paraded as trophies on the back of vans, and scores of hostages snatched from their homes.
They are full with pride. This is the first time that something like this happens in modern day history. For 16 years, Gaza has been under blockade, and for the first time, they are actively resisting. They are not on the defense, and this is truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And we are both in fear, but also in fear of how Israel will retaliate and how we've seen it retaliate overnight, and the missiles that it's launched and the attacks. But also, we are full of pride. We're really, really full of joy of what has happened.
If in the aftermath of such horror you celebrate that barbarism in the name of Islamist terror, then you absolutely do not have a right to spread your poison through our university system and benefit from it. By the way, I notice it's only now, when it isn't advantageous to them, that those with extreme Muslim views are all of a sudden concerned about free speech and hate crime laws in this country. And it doesn't take a genius, by the way, to figure out why this news/propaganda outlet called Middle East Eye has got out their violin for Abu Kamar. An American think tank poured through the details of the Middle East Eye in 2017 and said it acts far less as a traditional journalistic outlet and far more as an English language front for the Qatari-supported groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. And that, my friends, is precisely what we do not need in Britain. We, the British people, do not want you here. Go take your support for Hamas elsewhere. I'm absolutely delighted, actually, that the Home Office are taking steps like these. I don't say that often. She ought to be deported at the earliest opportunity.
Israel, as we know, took every step to undermine UNRWA, the UN agency, with a lot of allegations about UNRWA staff being members of Hamas, effectively blocked Hamas UNRWA operations in the north of Gaza. The World Central Kitchen withdrew after the attacks on its convoy. So the distribution of the aid that is piling up outside Gaza is itself extremely difficult. No doubt the situation within Gaza to distribute aid is very difficult. So, I mean, I think the evidence shows that Israel's allies have been increasingly frustrated that Israel has not been expediting aid at a point when there is famine, risk of famine in Gaza, risk of disease, lack of water and essential supplies, medical facilities. Otherwise, why would the US and UK and other Western leaders have been speaking in the way that they have been?
Forgive me, Mr. MacDonald, you asked specifically about evidence, and I would like to refer to the evidence that I had begun addressing earlier, namely the 449,230 tonnes of aid. It was asked how this compared with previous lorries of humanitarian assistance entering Gaza. It far outstrips the previous. It is also over 3 times the humanitarian provision that the World Food Programme estimates is required to feed the entire population of Gaza. And therefore we must ask ourselves, what is the impediment? Clearly, the 650 lorries that are waiting to be distributed factor into that, but it is also significant that the Fatah authorities have over the last few days been clear that Hamas in Gaza is hijacking aid, is depriving civilians of that aid, is stockpiling it, and is selling excess aid off in the black market at inflated prices. It has also been accused of killing aid workers in an attempt to generate a humanitarian crisis. Why would it do so, you may ask? Because it is plain that Hamas's only aim in the current circumstances is to survive and to drive up international pressure, as it has been doing, and the comments referred to are indicative of that, on Israel to cease its operation in Gaza. That, of course, would enable Hamas to survive and to continue not only to suppress and oppress the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, but also to fire rockets onto the Israeli civilian communities in Israel. That firing continued only yesterday. So that is an important aspect of the evidence that we have, the volume of aid going in and the real reasons as to why there may still be shortages in Gaza. But the references to some of the requirements, legal requirements on aid, are also important to be clear on. It was suggested to you that humanitarian relief is required without limit. That is not correct. Article 23 of the Fourth Geneva Convention is very clear that the requirement to facilitate aid into Gaza is caveated so that it is not diverted to enemy forces. In fact, the requirement doesn't apply where aid cannot be successfully provided without diversion. Nonetheless, as in previous conflicts, Israel is going far above the actual requirements on it.
A man armed with a knife and a
And now we go to France.
metal bar has been shot and killed by French police. He was the main suspect in an attempted arson at a synagogue in the Normandy city of Rouen, the latest in a storm of anti-Semitic acts amid the Israel-Hamas war. Officers were alerted to smoke rising from the synagogue early this morning and came face-to-face with the man when they arrived. Police say the man lunged towards the officers with that knife and metal bar, and that is when an officer opened fire, fatally wounding the man. Damage to the synagogue has been described as significant, and France's interior minister congratulated police for their reactivity and their courage.
Un individu a tenté de rentrer dans la synagogue. Il aurait escaladé une poubelle, serait monté au premier étage, aurait jeté un élément incendiaire dans la synagogue, une sorte de cocktail Molotov, si vous voulez, avec un départ de feu. Il est descendu du premier étage, après avoir, je crois, jeté, mais il faut être prudent, une barre de fer sur les forces de l'ordre, puis a tenté d'agresser les forces de l'ordre avec un couteau, long couteau, au moins un.
Ce que je veux dire, c'est que cette personne, dans sa vie administrative, est un citoyen qui n'est pas français. Il est d'origine algérienne, de ce que j'en sais. Et cet individu, sans doute après avoir mis le feu, l'enquête le dira, a foncé avec un couteau extrêmement important sur un jeune policier adjoint de 25 ans qui, de ce que j'en sais, et je voudrais le dire en tant que chef, a été extrêmement courageux, extrêmement professionnel. Moi, je voudrais le féliciter ici et lui dire qu'il sera décoré par la République pour son soutien à la protection des lieux de culte et des personnes.
Okay, now let me explain what I'm going to be presenting to you next. Jon Lovitz is no longer famous. You have to be an old man like me to remember who Jon Lovitz was. I didn't know until I prepared class that he even was Jewish. Jon Lovitz was one of the guys on Saturday Night Live, back in the years when Saturday Night Live was funny, before they became one-sided political and lost a great deal of their sense of humor. And Jon Lovitz played different characters, but the character that he was most famous for was the character that is called the Liar, L-I-A-R. The Liar. And I've got two short skits that I was able to find, so you have some idea of what he was in his days on Saturday Night Live, and then a very important interview with him. But just to appreciate who the guy was. Again, his character was known as the Liar.
The following is a public service announcement. If you have a problem telling the truth, this message is for you.
Hello, my name is Tommy Flanagan, and I'm a member of Pathological Liars Anonymous. In fact, I'm the president of that organization. Yeah, that's who I am. I didn't always lie. No, I used to tell the truth. But then one day I told a lie and I got away with it. Yeah. Told my parents I had a brother that they'd never met. They got mad at me for not telling them sooner. And they kicked me out of the house. Yeah, that's what happened. So then I drifted for a while till I landed a job. Yeah, as a stockbroker in India. And I was about to make an investment in a cow when all of a sudden a small, Chinese man came up to me, and before I knew it, he was clipping my nails. Yeah, that's what he was doing. Then I was about to pay him for a job well done, when out of the sky fell a herd of albino chickens. And they swooped down on us and gently sucked up all the air. And I blacked out. But when I came to, I was in the middle of the ocean on a surfboard, surfing. Good, too. I was hanging a minimum of 5 at all times. And then, if you can believe, a miniature tidal wave came along, and I rode it all the way into shore, jumped off the board. Who do you think was there to greet me? Chinaman's wife. And she took my hand, and together we joined Pathological Liars Anonymous. So if you're out there listening and you want to stop your habit of lying, just give us a call. Because we have meetings now every week at my house in Jamaica.
Let's bring in actor and comedian Jon Lovitz. Jon, what do you see happening across the country?
Well, it's what I was told growing up by my father, that the Jews in Germany were German first, and they couldn't believe this was happening, and they didn't believe it. And there's a book called Night that Elie Wiesel wrote about the Holocaust, and he was 15 years old. And he said there was a guy in his little village who was something wrong with him, but he was the village idiot and just would say crazy stuff, and nobody would listen to him. And one day the guy disappeared for 4 days, and then he popped back up, and he said his hair was wild, and he was screaming. He goes, "They're putting all the Jews on trains and taking them and killing them," and nobody believed him because he was the village idiot. And you hear this growing up, and it's happening again. And I still think a lot of Jewish people are in disbelief. And they go, "You're a Jewish American." I go, "No, I'm an American, and I happen to be, my religion is Jewish, and I happen to be a comedian, but I'm an American citizen, and I don't know how this can't be upsetting to everybody." And I don't understand it, because Israel is a democracy like we are, and Israel is our ally. So what don't you get? And secondly, the students on Columbia blocking Jewish kids from going into school. I tweeted something about it because, I mean, I went to college, and I can't imagine having to deal with this. I was 18, and I lived in a fine arts dorm, and everybody had a different ethnic background: Chinese, Mexican, African American. I'm Jewish. We would have dinner together every night. We would roast each other about it. And then I'd say, "But it doesn't mean anything. We're starting our lives. You want to be a singer. You want to be a painter. You want to be an actor. I want to be an actor," you know. And I'm thinking, these kids are in high school. They worked their butt off to get into a great school like Columbia, and now they have to deal with this, and it's horrible. So I said I wanted to say something to help them, you know. And like you said, it's like weeds. If you don't nip it in the bud, it's just going to keep spreading and get worse and worse. And we've seen it get worse and worse.
Yeah, we sure
have. So I feel compelled to say something.
We have seen it get as worse as it possibly can be. You heard the gentleman at the top.
It can get way worse.
Absolutely. You heard him at the top say, you know, I couldn't go on campus and burn a cross and chant KKK and prevent black students from getting to class. Why do you think... Or about anybody, about transgender people, gay people,
well, what
women.
You said about,
why is it different with Jewish students?
I don't know. I think people like, you know, who are Jewish like myself are naive and thought, oh, there's not all this anti-Semitism. I think it's always been there. It's just coming out. But what you kind of said about, you know, you respect everybody, whatever their religion, whatever their race, you respect everybody. That's what Judaism, the religion, is about, is respecting life and people. And I still think, you know, people have a right to protest peacefully, and they have a, you know, normally you'd get a permit and then you get a place to protest. I don't know why they're allowed to do it on the school. And I don't know how people that aren't students are camping out in the middle of the school. They should be like, isn't that trespassing? I don't understand.
What I don't understand is you have the President of the United States, you have the White House. They won't even touch this. Do you expect more from the leadership in this country?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think anyone doing this against anybody like this should stop it. I mean, preventing students from going to class, it's ridiculous. It happened to a friend of mine. I was speaking to her this morning. She has one kid at Duke University and she has another kid at Cornell. At Duke University, months ago, they started doing a protest and they nipped it in the bud and said, no, you can't do that here. And they've had no problems since. Cornell didn't. They've had all these problems. Her daughter couldn't go to class. She couldn't take a test. And the teacher wouldn't respond to her, and she had trouble retaking it and finally got to. But it's bad. And you know, I don't know why people say, why are you speaking up? Why aren't other people in Hollywood who are way bigger names than me not saying anything? And my answer is, I don't know. I think they're either afraid or they're afraid they're going to lose it'll hurt their business. But I feel like it's so bad, how can you not say something? Like, you have to. And then, you know, people go, well, who are you? I go, hey, look you asked me to come on the show. I'm not out there with a megaphone. You know what I mean? But I appreciate the opportunity to say something.
You're being very humble to say there's not a lot of names out there bigger than Jon Lovitz. Jon, thank you so much for joining Jesse Waters Primetime.
Thank you.
Dose of truth. Very refreshing. We appreciate it. You won't get it anywhere else.
Mr. Chicano, Mr. Wahlberg, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the panel for being here. The day after the October 7th attack, Professor Joseph Mossad, and I only single him out amongst numerous others that I could single out, because he particularly is a tenured professor and chairs the School of Arts and Sciences Academic Review Committee. He wrote in an article praising, and I quote him, the innovative Palestinian resistance, end quote, for attacking Israel and glorifying Hamas's slaughter of nearly 1,200 Jews as, and I quote again, awesome, astonishing, astounding, and incredible. What perverse statements. Yeah. A tenured professor who's been saying these type of things for 20 years at Columbia. President Shafiq, you recently said, and I quote, it is absolutely unacceptable for any member of the Columbia community to promote the use of terror and violence, end quote. Do you condemn Professor Mossad's statement, and has he faced any consequences for it?
Congressman, I do condemn his statement. I am appalled by what he said.
Any consequences?
He has been spoken to.
Spoken
and
to?
I should just, and I think you could.
So support of terrorism is acceptable if you're a Columbia professor?
Not at all. And I should say,
he's been spoken to.
I didn't get to fit.
I have your answer.
No.
Let me move on here. Professor Mossad has also been known to have called Israelis, quote, cruel and bloodthirsty colonizers, end quote, and foreigners who joined the Israeli military as, quote, baby-killing Zionist Jewish volunteers for Israeli Jewish supremacy, end quote. In 2005, an investigation by Columbia corroborated allegations that Mossad yelled at a Jewish student who questioned his views to, quote, get out of my classroom. Can you imagine free speech, diversity on campus? Well, let's move it over. Let's intentionally disregard the feelings of a Jewish student as being less than human in this classroom to someone like myself who might be given this to wear to remember and bring home the hostages now, to quietly take it off so my professor wouldn't see it. A professor who holds my academic career in the palm of his hands. That's free speech. That's diversity. President Shafiq, I'm concerned that that isn't happening here. So let me ask this question. As the chair of the School of Arts and Sciences Academic Review Committee, Professor Mossad is responsible for, quote, overseeing the periodic review of all departments, centers, and institutes in the school. Do you stand behind Professor Mossad remaining chair of the Academic Review Committee, giving his support for terrorism and harassing Jewish students?
Congressman Wahlberg, I just want to confirm that when faculty behave in any discriminatory fashion at Columbia,
You talk to him.
there are consequences. No, we take them out of the classroom if necessary. We
Is he out of the
remove them
classroom?
from leadership posts if necessary. We allow students to leave those classes if they feel at all uncomfortable.
Is he out of the classroom?
He is, I believe, to answer your question, he is no longer chair of that committee and does not have a leadership role.
But not out of the classroom. Let me move over to the trustees. As trustees, would you approve Professor Mossad for tenure if the decision were before you today?
I would not.
Nor would I.
Then why is he still in the classroom? You are trustees of this preeminent institution of diversity, of free thought. And you talk to professors who make horrific statements like this. And as I said, I could have addressed other professors. You, in fact, even pointed out that there were numerous professors that you're looking at right now. If they're only going to get a talking to, I'm concerned. I yield back.
Rabbi Tuli Wise, thanks for joining us, founder of Israel 365. President Trump made news recently when he came out against the two-state solution. How significant is this?
Well, very significant. He would be the first American president to go against the conventional wisdom that has dominated the landscape for the last 30 years. It is it's very consistent with his other statements since the war began. President Trump has been very supportive of Israel, but what he said to Time magazine was very surprising. He said that he used to believe in the Palestinian state. He used to believe in a two-state solution, but he doesn't believe it anymore. And he's changed his mind in light of, frankly, the Palestinian community, the atrocity itself, the rampant support for the Hamas attacks from the population, not only in Gaza, but also throughout the Arab towns in Judea and Samaria.
And I also understand you wrote a letter, along with others, to Trump himself.
Right. We had formed a coalition called Keep God's Land, which is a coalition of faith leaders, Jewish and Christian, who are both opposed to the two-state solution, opposed to a Palestinian terror state, in support of Israel maintaining its sovereignty and settling the entire greater Israel, of Israel, Judea and Samaria, and Gaza. And as soon as the Trump's remarks were publicized, so we drafted a letter to thank President support for his moral clarity. We circulated it in the Jewish community. We circulated it in the Christian community outside it through the Keep God's Land coalition. And in just an hour, we had 100 signatures. I think we're up to about 400 signatures of faith leaders who are in gratitude to President Trump for changing his mind and revoking his support for the Palestinian state.
Yeah. Yet the Biden administration actually seems to be pushing for a two-state solution. Why do you believe a two-state solution is not what Israel should be doing right now?
Yeah, the Biden administration on October 8th and 9th was already reaffirming their commitment to the two-state solution as the only solution. A lot of people think, well, there is no alternative to the two-state. It is the solution. It's not true. There are alternatives. Ambassador David Friedman, who is a big part of the leadership of the Keep God's Land coalition, he has presented an alternative, a one Jewish state solution where Israel maintains sovereignty throughout Judea and Samaria. The two-state solution would reward terrorism, number one, and it would be a strategic and military nightmare for the state of Israel. The Palestinian state would be on our borders, on our neck, surrounding our airports, surrounding Jerusalem.
but also from a biblical, spiritual point of view, this is not even our land. Doesn't belong to the Israeli people. The land of Israel belongs to God, and it's not ours to give it up. We must keep God's land.
Well, that's not. It's a point that a lot of people may not realize.
Can you imagine how hard it is to stop Ronaldo from scoring a goal? I used to play soccer. Let me tell you, it's almost impossible. But the Iranian team just did the impossible. To the Iranian people, I say, you showed courage on the playing field. And today you show the same courage in the streets of Iran. Iran has many problems: air pollution, water scarcity, billions wasted on terror. Can you imagine what would happen if the Iranian government, instead of wasting your money on Syria and Yemen and unnecessary wars in the Middle East, would start investing it in solving these problems in Iran? The solution to all these problems is the Iranian people. That's why I offered medical aid to save Iranian lives after a devastating earthquake. That's why I opened a Farsi Telegram group to teach water conservation to Iranian farmers. And that's why I'll never stop advocating for peace with the Iranian people. One day I'll hope to watch Iran's soccer team go head-to-head against Israel in a free Tehran. On that day, we'll all be winners.
על משמר ארצנו וערי אלוהינו מגבול הלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים מן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה ביבשה
ייתן אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו, ניגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם ויעטרם בכתר ישועה ובעטרת ניצחון. וקוים בהם הכתוב, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם, להילחם לכם עם אויביכם, להושיע אתכם, ונאמר אמן.
אבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב הוא יברך את חיילי צבא ההגנה לישראל צבא ההגנה
I want to thank everybody for being here today. We're now in that 76th year of Israel. As she begins her for next year. And our strength as a people throughout the world, we're bonded together, we're united together, and we have the support as well of so many wonderful Christians throughout the world. And that's part of what these programs also are bringing out. The enormous amount of support, you don't see it in the news media. They don't cover that. But the enormous amount of support from the Christian and non-Jewish communities around the world, particularly here in the United States. And again, this week we were able to see strong Jewish support in England, Jews proudly marching in London, the French mayor of city of Paris and French police taking down an anti-Semite promptly, and the guy being the cop who killed him is going to be given a special medal awarding him for his bravery. And of course, what we saw from Israel. Look forward to seeing you at our other classes, and thanks so much for being here. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.